Well, a very good evening to you. Thank you very much for taking time out of the end of your day. My name is Casper Bartington. I am the Head of Volunteer and Education Engagement at APM. And I'm just going to say a few words about this evening's session before I hand over to my colleague from the APM Midlands Branch, Andy Baber. So this is the second in a series of 3 webinars that we've designed with our APM Midlands branch and also universities from across the Midlands area. It's open to all, of course, during these virtual times. And we've been looking at some hot topics that we believe and universities believe we should be doing sessions on. So session number 1 last year was about Agile. What is Agile project management? Today is about stakeholder engagement, and you can help us influence what the 3rd session will be, perhaps a little bit further down the line in this conversation. We are using Slido this evening a couple of times. So we have a question open at the moment, which is what term best describes you? Are you a student, an academic, or a practitioner? So please do engage with the QR code that's on the screen in front of you. We're going to have another couple of questions about what is stakeholder engagement to you, and at the end, what's your top takeaway from the session? So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to your proper host for this evening, Andy Baber, who will walk you through tonight's structure. So Andy, over to you, and thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you very much, Casper, for that warm introduction. Welcome everybody to this 2 of 3 webinars. This time is subject matter Stakeholder Engagement 101. As Casper suggested, my name's Andy Baber. I'm volunteer for the APM Midlands branch, specifically as part of the HEI subcommittee of that branch. With the help of Casper and the other colleagues from the APM, we've managed to pull together the following panelists that great pleasure to introduce you to right now. In the first instance, it's Dr. Anthony Olomolaiye from Coventry University, Mr. Ian Gribbs from the APM SIG, practitioner, and Dr. Unterhitzenberger from University of Leeds. As Casper suggested, there is a Slido going on in the background, which we would most welcome lots of input to that. You're also welcome to post questions actually on this webinar chat forum as well. And I'll do my very best to get those questions as evenly spread and posed to the panelists as quickly and efficiently as possible. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our first panelist, who will go through their view of the subject matter of this webinar, as will the 2 subsequent panelists, for 3 to 4 or 5 minutes, depending on how long we take, hopefully to give you some inspirational thoughts and vent some questions following their narrative. So Anthony, do you want to take the stage and be the first to give us your interpretation of Stakeholder Engagement 101? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. As Andy mentioned, my name is Anthony, and I'm an associate professor at Coventry University. My dad was a project manager, so I was born into project management, and over the years, I've seen the changes in project management environment. From those days when nobody cared about the stakeholders and all they cared about was just to deliver the project and move away, down to the days of managing stakeholders. And now we are in the era of engaging stakeholders. And what we mean by this? What we mean by this is actually engaging your stakeholders in such a way that you develop and deliver your project successfully. I've had so many experiences of engaging with stakeholders, and those are some of the experiences that I'll be sharing with you tonight. For me, I always look at stakeholders that I want to move them from being participants in the projects to partners in the project. And for me, that involves not looking at carrying out a transaction with them, but getting them to also own the project. This can be very challenging. It's not easy. If it's easy, all of us will not be here tonight. But I'm hoping that by the time we finish this session tonight, you will have understood some of the things that you can do to engage your stakeholder a lot better. Thank you so much, Andy. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So that's very enlightening as to your history and your background, as to what evoked you to become project management expert in this manner, particularly with regard to stakeholder engagement. And it's an interesting aside about your father's involvement with APM. Thank you. Ian, do you want to take the microphone and give us a brief overview of yourself and your thoughts on stakeholder engagement?
Yes, thanks, Andy. Yeah, I suppose I got involved in project management way back in 1977, and that sort of gives my age away a little bit. Long before project management was actually a skill set or a job as such. Stakeholders were not even mentioned, let alone thought about. In those days, that was the object of the project: get it sorted and get it done, and don't spend too much money. Was basically the format that we were given in those days. And subsequently, through the years, like Anthony a bit, I've got engaged in a lot of fairly major projects. Some of them in the couple of £1 billion range on that, and dealt with an awful lot of stakeholders, both UK and internationally, and particularly in the Middle East. And what I found out, and Anthony was absolutely right, it's forming that partnership with your stakeholder. I think that once you've got that partnership, that rapport with your stakeholder, life can be an awful lot easier. And I always found that the challenge was actually identifying the stakeholders. Some are easy to identify, and some are a lot more difficult. And I had a project which I'll allude to later on, where no matter what I tried, I couldn't get the senior stakeholder to move. He kept saying, no, I was trying to re-baseline a £2 billion project, and he kept refusing. And after about 4 months, I found out that he was actually talking to a guy that lived 3 doors from me, who was saying, no, don't listen to him. I don't think he's telling you the right thing. And he's the guy that I would never, ever have put on a stakeholder map. And what influence he had with the general at the time, I've got no idea. But he had such an influence that he could stop the project moving forward. So it's just finding not just the one that's got the checkbook in their hand, but the one that's got the power in their hand as well. And they're not often the same person. And it's that identifying and then categorizing your stakeholders so that how you can engage with them successfully and move them forward into, as Anthony's already said, that partnership that is so necessary for a successful project outcome. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Ian. Excellent. Very good. And last but very much not least, Christine, if you would also like to give your first sort of introductions and overview of yourself in the context of stakeholder engagement. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, as Andy already said, my name is Christine Unterhitzenberger. I'm an associate professor in project management at the University of Leeds. I worked for nearly 10 years in the industry as a construction manager and later on as a project manager. During that time, I had a number of, I would call them non-standard projects, which had quite a lot of exposure to the public and to the media. One of them was a 5-star hotel in Zurich, which was at a very prominent location. I was responsible for the project management of 3 football stadiums in Germany, which also attracted a lot of attention of fans, of neighbors, local residents, and the media. And I also was responsible for a project by the Catholic Church. And that project underwent huge media scrutiny, for example, because there was previously, in a different area unrelated to this project, but a financial scandal with a different project associated with the Catholic Church. And therefore, there was a lot of attention. And even as the project itself wasn't very complex, to manage the stakeholder relationships suddenly made it a very complex project. And these experiences from my practice motivated me to move into academia to do a PhD. And my main research interest now is into the psychosocial and organizational aspects of projects. So how do people work together? How do people build relationships in projects? How do they for example, perceive fairness? How do they use emotional intelligence and these areas? So stakeholder engagement for me is very much moving a step beyond the more traditional stakeholder management, where it's about identifying and then categorizing the stakeholders. Yes, we need to do that. That's the basis for us to be able to do engagement. But then we need to build on that. And as both Anthony and Ian already said, build this partnership and invest time to build a relationship with them, because stakeholder engagement is not a quick fix. It's not done over a 5-minute email, which we send out because we think, oh, we should contact this stakeholder. So it is really about having a strategy, investing time and an interest in building a relationship with the stakeholders. And yeah, I think there is no manual available on how to do it, but it is about building interpersonal skills and developing a skill set in how to engage with individuals, because it hardly ever goes to plan, because we work with people, they are humans, and there we need also to be able to adapt to how the stakeholders react. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion now.
Likewise.
Okay, thank you very much, Christine, Ian and Anthony there. Excellent. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions already come in. The first one is really in relation to different understandings and establishment of stakeholders. I think there's a bit of a theme here in that, would the panelists be able to give some insight? I know, Christine, you said there was no article or booklet to explain this, but any methods that you might have for understanding your stakeholders as people, as well as their requirements, any sort of methods that you might have in establishing an understanding of your stakeholders. So maybe the first question, back to yourself, Christine, because that's the kind of words that I picked up for myself. So any methods that you have for understanding your stakeholders as people, but also as their requirements?
Yeah, so as I said, I think it's about building a relationship, and through this building of the relationship, understanding the interests of your stakeholders. And by interest, I don't only mean the position, like the example which Ian just brought, that this person had the position of not rebaselining the project. It is about understanding the interest. Where do they come from? Why are they doing that? And it can help to, yeah, regularly talk to them. It really depends on the individual stakeholders. For projects, we had a proper, like, detailed communication plan. Who needs to be involved first? Who needs to be communicated to first? How do we communicate with them? Is it more formal? Is it written? Is it informal? Do we take them out for lunch? And it is really kind of immersing yourself into your stakeholders to, yeah, understand where they come from. And there are different techniques. You can start with brainstorming. You can start with talking to your colleagues, talking to other people on the project, in small talk, informal conversations, to get a better understanding of what are the social dynamics in the project, what do you need to be aware of, who is involved in what way. It is often that people and stakeholders become perceived to be difficult. We actually did a study about that, without their intention to be difficult, but there is a reason for it, that they are difficult or perceived to be difficult. Mostly it is because they create challenging situations for us as a project manager. And that might be because of we haven't considered them enough. There has been a past relationship with someone else on the project or with the company which we don't know about. So it is really about trying to find out as much as possible about your stakeholders through different ways: brainstorming, talking to other people, do your research, try to understand who you are dealing with.
Yeah. Can I just come in there a minute, Andy? That's great, Christian. Exactly, that is that. I've always found that stakeholder engagement and building a partnership with your stakeholders cannot be done in a formal meeting. It can't be done by email. It can only be done by going and talking to people face to face, where it's at all possible. I mean, the world's a big place, but we can, even with the video conferencing now, we can get in front of people. And I've always found that somebody way back in my early days said the first question you've got to answer is the person is sitting there thinking, what's in it for me? So you've actually got to look at what they perceive to be in it for them with the success of the project. And once you can understand what their thought process is, now that might be a different variance to what the project objectives are, and now you have a discussion to try and align them back into what the project objectives are. But if you don't understand their thought process of what's in it for me, they're always going to be perceived as that difficult stakeholder, because they don't fully understand where it's going and why they should be supporting it and moving it forward. So it's getting to them. I mean, I was based in the Middle East for 28 years. I traveled up to see my stakeholders, which was an 8-hour round trip by car every week. And I would get up at 5:30 in the morning. I would drive up 4 hours across the desert, meet with my stakeholders, the senior stakeholders, for an hour, get in the car and drive home again. Because I couldn't do it by phone. I needed to talk to them, find out what their issues were. And then every 5 weeks, I'd fly back to the UK and talk to all my stakeholders over a 3-day period in the UK. It was long before we had decent video conferencing. And again, it's just saying to them, what's your problem? What can I do to help you get through this? What don't you understand about the project? What don't you like about the project? And once you can get that, then you can start a dialogue with them to move it forward. But if you don't understand where they're coming from, you stand no chance. I mean, stakeholders are a given in any project. They're going to be there. So you might as well engage with them. You ignore them at your peril.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Anthony.
Ian, Andy, if I may just add to what Christian and Ian have said, the issue with stakeholder is very, very complex sometimes. And just like Christian and Ian said, the first question I always ask myself is, what is the most important thing to the stakeholder? That means, what is the baseline? Where are we going? Now, there are some stakeholders that you also need to identify what their attitude towards your project is. Do they see your project in positive lights, or do they see your project in negative lights? Because the way you will approach them will be totally different. For those who are very supportive and see your project in positive lights, yeah, your effort might not be too much, but those who are totally against your projects, you will know that you got a big task in front of you. So it's very, very important that you also identify their attitude. And when you identify that attitude, don't just take it that, oh, their attitude is positive or negative. Ask yourself, why? Why? We worked on a project that was 1993-94, and the big stakeholder on that particular project had a very, very negative attitude towards our projects. And I did not understand because I did not probe it. But later on, I found out that in his organization, he has suggested a different project that was knocked down, and our project was favored. So to prove to his bosses that we were bad projects, his attitude towards our project was very, very negative. So it took us a while to understand that, and it took us a while to be able to let him see our project in positive light. So try to understand their attitude too, and ask yourself why.
Yeah.
Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Yeah. So there's lots of talk here about how to manage effectively stakeholders, known or unknown stakeholders, etc., moving towards more of a partnership vibe, partnership feel, if you like. But fundamentally, I think there's a couple of questions that have come in that I can't really ignore, that they're centered around, guess what? The big elephant in the room, that is everything that relates to lockdown, COVID, pandemic, etc. And I think specifically, if we want to dive a little bit deeper into this and go a bit more specific in that one question is centered around what changes does the panelists feel we have been seen during lockdown and the COVID pandemic for stakeholder engagement, i.e. the use of technology, obviously the lack of and the reduced amount of physical interaction that we can have at site. So to come back to your point, Ian, and also Anthony, if you were to face the same stakeholders today, you wouldn't just be able to rock up at their gatehouse and ask for a nice quiet coffee in the Starbucks on the corner of the street. So how would you, what would you see the changes that the current issues have brought about to stakeholder engagement? I think, Anthony, if you want to start with yourself on that question.
I mean, to be very sincere with you, I always believe long time ago that the best way to manage stakeholders is to go into their physical environments, you know, and chat with them, talk to them, possibly just study their body language. But the situation right now has forced us into a situation whereby we now have to trust each other over either MS Teams or Zoom or things of that nature, and you are now stuck in that particular virtual environment. I thought that would not be possible, but I think because of what has happened, the people on the project management side and even the stakeholders have had to adapt. And I think that adaptation, which is part of human nature, has also added a little bit of complexity to how we engage stakeholders. Some of them are not just turn up for the meeting that you asked for on Zoom or MS Teams. Some of them turn up and their body language tells you instantly that they found that particular meeting a waste of time. And there is no way you can call them aside and say, oh, can I just have a quick chat with you? Or you are having, I mean, what you have done in a physical environment, maybe during the break, you could have put them in a corner and just have a quiet word with them. That has now become very, very difficult. But the good news of this also is that you can now make use of technology to get in touch with them. They can't hide away all the time right now. You can either give them a phone call or you can send them email upon email. At one point in time, for the lack of word, somewhere along the line, they will break. You understand what I mean? So you just have to find a way of using the technology available to us right now and letting them understand and say, this situation that we find ourselves, we just have to make the best use of it. And that's what we're doing right now. All of us are engaging in this virtual environment and we are making very, very, very good use of it. And I've seen some successful stakeholder engagements that I did not think were possible before.
Right.
One of the things...
Christine, do you have a view on that? Sorry, Ian, do you have a view on that, Christine, in interacting with stakeholders with the current confines that we're faced with?
Yes, thank you, Andy. Yes, I would say it makes it more challenging because, as Anthony just said, we don't have the opportunities at the end of a meeting to have, for example, an informal conversation, and that's why I think we need to make an extra effort to do the stakeholder engagement. So make sure that you, if required, have some one-to-ones with specific stakeholders. Don't just assume everything, you've set up all the meetings, everything can be done in the meetings where there is the big group. In order to build the relationship and to understand where your stakeholder is coming from, it is worth it to also allow for some one-to-one conversations with your stakeholders if they are important ones, if you need them, and have a bit of more of an informal talk online via video conference. And I think it also gives us new opportunities. For example, I just spoke last week with a few practitioners, and they said that public consultations for new projects are now being done online, are now being done virtually. So they actually reach more people through the public consultation virtually than they would if it takes place in like face-to-face in-person environments, because people don't necessarily go there. But by doing it virtually, a lot more people can access it. Or that they can now offer kind of virtual reality tours through a building to give the stakeholders a better understanding of what it's going to look like in the future, and to kind of take them on the journey. So technology has made such a huge leap in the last 12 months. And a lot of organizations have really embraced that because they had to be innovative and find new ways of doing it. So I think technology will probably play a bigger role in the future in the stakeholder engagement as well, but it won't completely replace the personal interactions which we will have.
Sure.
But I think, also taking the good which has come out of this huge technology leap which has happened, and to be potentially more inclusive and to reach stakeholders which we otherwise have difficulties to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian, back to you. Sorry to interject.
No, if we go back to what we were saying earlier about this relationship and partnership that we're trying to form with stakeholders, if you look at what's happened over the past year, where homeschooling has become a given for many, many, many people around the country. And what we found here is that we've asked all of our stakeholders and our delivery partners, can you please let us have the schedule of where you will be involved in homeschooling, so we don't try and call a meeting during that time. So we give them time to have their homeschooling bit during the day, because it's a given. Homeschooling is there, and how long? I mean, it's stopping now because kids are going back to school, but it's a fact of life. And if you ignore that and try and book in meetings when people are supposed to be homeschooling, then you're going to get a disgruntled stakeholder if they bother dialing in, or you're going to get an absent stakeholder because they're busy homeschooling. Neither of which is a good situation to be in with your stakeholders if you're trying to build a rapport. And the other thing that we've done, that I do, is when I'm producing the agenda for meetings, I normally send people a blank copy email saying, is there anything you would like to discuss on a one-to-one basis at the end of the meeting or at the beginning of the meeting? And I will program something in that we can then have that one-to-one dialogue at the beginning or the end before everybody else joins or after everybody else has left. So giving them that opportunity to say, I would like 5 minutes of your time here. And we can either redial in on a different one, or we can stay on that same one again. But it's just keeping people involved and making sure that we're aware of their situation as well as our own.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. So I think we've gone around that a little bit, but what I'd like to do, and it's not necessarily linked to pandemic or COVID, etc., but it's more looking at the situation from the other side of the fence, as the question has been posed to me. So as project managers, we've been forced to change due to the various lockdown and COVID restrictions. Question here is, have stakeholders? So is there a feeling that there is a shift in stakeholder relationship engagement from the other side of the fence, i.e., do the stakeholders, are they relaxed? Are they empathetic as to what our challenges are, or are they sitting in their ivory towers expecting us to find ways to visit them one-to-one and buy them that coffee that we used to do 12 months ago? So flipping it on its head, is any of the panelists got a view from the stakeholder side of this question? So let's start with Christine, if we can, if that's possible.
Well, I don't have a direct stakeholder view because we would probably have to ask the stakeholders, but I think
Sure.
I wouldn't want to generalize here. I think that it doesn't completely change how people their position towards a project. I think it is more about how do they feel being involved and potentially having a voice if they want to have one. And that I would probably assume, and it is an assumption, I have to be honest, but I would assume that is more challenging at the moment because it is simply more difficult to have these have conversations and also more informal conversations. So that's why I said earlier we need to make a more conscious effort now in this environment to really reach our stakeholders, and I think there's also more of a risk of maybe not picking up all the stakeholders, to potentially be not aware of some, and then there obviously is the feeling of being left out, and that then builds resistance and creates these challenging situations.
Yeah. I think what you're suggesting there, that engagement is probably even more important under these current conditions than it perhaps was before. Yeah. Anthony, do you have any views on this? I appreciate, again, none of the panelists can look at it from a stakeholder perspective. Please.
What I've noticed is that stakeholder needs has not changed. The situation has changed, but the needs of the stakeholder has not changed. Now, what has also happened is that we now have a dichotomy. And like Ian was saying before, there are some stakeholders that, due to home situation, are constantly under pressure. Okay? And due to that, some of them can be very, very confrontational. And you, as the project manager, needs to dampen that particular confrontational approach. But what I've also found, and I don't have the statistics, is that most of my stakeholders now have more time to engage with the projects. So there's no excuse of, oh, I need to catch my flight to Brussels, I need to catch my flight to Paris or something like that. They are now at home and they want to know more about what is happening in the project. So I could be at work and I just get a message and say, Anthony, do you have 30 seconds for a chat? Anthony, do you have this time for a chat? And I'm getting more of this frequently from the stakeholders, because what is happening is that they just find suddenly they are no longer in control like when we had the opportunity of seeing each other face to face. So they want to know exactly what is going on. So like every other 2 hours or thereabout, you might just get a message, hey, Anthony, what is happening? Hey, Anthony, what is this? And I also found out that I'm attending more meetings with stakeholders than before. Unlike before, that it takes your time to attend meetings and things like that. A stakeholder who is very important might just call an impromptu meeting. Anthony, what is happening here and things like that. So the need has not changed, but the request from stakeholder is now a little bit higher than before.
Yeah. Good. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, some of the projects I'm looking at the moment is that I've got some of the stakeholders are saying, are you going to spend this money by the given date? I'm on running a government grant program at the moment where the money is going to be spent by a given date. Mm-hmm. And then going back to the inbred stakeholders within the projects and saying to them, come on, you've got to give me a date. But unfortunately, one of the projects I'm dealing with is Oxford University, that's developing the virus for the inoculations for the virus. So trying to get hold of them is like trying to get blood out of a stone, because they're 24/7 working on new parts for new bits for the virus. So it's trying to balance them out. But I've generally found that stakeholders are in the same position as us as project managers. They can't come and see us, we can't go and see them, so that we're all having to rely on what we're doing now is video conferencing, and most of them are understanding of that. Yeah, you'll get the odd one if we're not careful of their situation, and we misjudge their situation, then we get some that might be a little bit crinkly around the edges because we've done something wrong or said not said the right thing. But it's just, if you feel somebody's not fully engaged or they're a little bit upset about something, is either get on the phone with them or get a one-to-one with them on Teams or Zoom or whatever, apologize if necessary, and get to the bottom of what's upset them and how you can put that right. I mean, as Anthony said, I'm probably dealing with the stakeholders more on a day-to-day basis than I would normally if it was an environment 13, 14 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that, Ian. I also feel that stakeholders appear to have, certainly the ones I'm dealing with, have seen a little bit more compassion as well, in that they're perhaps less interested, if you like, first and foremost, with what we're doing for them as stakeholders, and more, how's it going in your country? You know, what's the death rate looking like? How has it affected your immediate family? The homeschooling that was talked about earlier on, how are you coping with that? Has it had a detrimental effect for your business to do for your ability to do business? You know, the access to the Wi-Fi, etc. And more recently, some of my stakeholders have been fascinated by the relative success of the vaccination program here in the UK. So you end up talking about different things that from a more of a compassionate perspective. So it's brought in almost back round to the first point that I think all three of you made in your opening statements, was this is more about a partnership rather than just you're my stakeholder, I'm your delivery person. So back into that partnership piece and moving away. Let's park the COVID piece for now. But partnerships appear to be sort of well-used word during this evening. As I said, there's a bit of a theme going on here. Do you feel that a move towards more of a partnership in project management with your stakeholder, would that require some form of adjustment to the account? Would that change the risk levels one way or the other? Would it be more risky? Would it be more risk averse? Would it lead to readjustments in the costings for the collaboration? What's your thoughts on the subtle changes from the sort of the old school stakeholders versus this partnership idea that we're bringing into the mix here? Ian, did you want to make a start on that, if that's right?
Talking about the risk on that, I found that the risk is when you don't have a partnership with your stakeholders. By having a very good working relationship with them, a social relationship as well as a partnership, that will actually, it will identify other risks, but it will actually diminish some of the more serious risks, because you can get them out in the open and get them mitigated and dealt with at a much earlier stage, because then everybody's being open and honest with each other, that there is a risk there. And the more open and honest you are with each other, and I really think that sadly in the past, stakeholder management, as it was called, and now stakeholder engagement, was almost a tick in the box for project managers. They did their stakeholder engagement, their stakeholder management plan, they got all the ticks in the box, they put it in a book and they put it on the shelf, and it gathered dust for the life of the project, because they'd done it. And it's the same with the communication plan, which is built into stakeholder engagement. They did a communication plan, it got signed off, it went on the shelf and got buried in dust. And I think with this, what this has driven us to is that we need a much more robust methodology of getting stakeholder engagement and stakeholder partnership running. And as Christine said, there isn't a book out there that tells us how to do it, because all stakeholders are different. They have different ideas, different thought processes, different aspirations in a project. So it's a little bit about getting in there and finding out and almost making it up as you go along to fit the project and to fit the stakeholders that are there. I think we need to be more aware of stakeholder engagement. It's nice to see that Box 7 has gone to stakeholder engagement a bit more. Box 6 was still stakeholder management. Just as an illustration, I was doing a presentation for a major airline, and there was about 30 or 40 members of the major airline were in the audience, along with about 30 other people that weren't part of the airline. And the session had been opened and presented, much like Andy's done on this one, by the Senior Vice President Customer Services of that particular airline. So when I asked them all to list who their stakeholders were, it was quite amazing that not one of them within that airline had listed the passenger as a stakeholder, which I thought was quite amusing. And then the others were all saying, no, you manage your stakeholders, you don't just engage with them. So I said to this person there, who was quite senior, I said, so you manage all your stakeholders? He said, yes, of course I do. I said, on your stakeholder list, you've put the VP Sales and Customer Services as one of your stakeholders. He said, yes. I said, it'd be very interesting to see how you manage her, because I don't think you'd even pass the secretary. You might engage with them and you might manage their expectation, but you won't manage somebody at that position. So you have a different mindset of what you're doing and building that relationship into there. And it was a very interesting hour and a half session that evening.
Yeah.
One of the major elements.
That's a great anecdote, Ian. Thank you. Christina, I saw you little smile on your face there. Have you got anything to add to that, to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think what is important, what we haven't touched on so far, is when we talk about stakeholders and stakeholder engagement, that we need to differentiate a little bit between kind of the project team as a stakeholder and the members of the project team and how we engage with them, because we engage usually much more frequently, as was mentioned, through meetings and things with the project team. But then also we have the, let's call them external stakeholders, who are not part of our team, who we don't have a contract with, who might be local residents, who might be, as I mentioned earlier, the media. So we don't kind of have any formal relationship with them, and that pretty much makes it impossible to actively manage them. So we need to find ways to engage with them, to have this conversation, to find out where are they coming from. And your original question was about the risk. I think, or we have a term which we call relational risk. So if we actually don't engage with stakeholders, we will create a relational risk in our project. And that relates to if we don't have the cooperative behavior towards the project which we need from our stakeholders. There are various reasons where this can come from. If we talk more about our project team, with potentially opportunistic behavior and a kind of principal-agent relationship where the agent very much acts in their own interest based on information only they have. And through the engagement, through building the trust, and I always come back to it, building the relationship, we can work towards reducing this relational risk. So in terms of our of the risk of the project, it definitely helps to reduce the risk if we engage with our stakeholders and if we build this relationship with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks for keeping me back on track on the question there. Anthony, what's your thoughts on this risk-related statement?
My thought on this is stakeholder engagement is risky. And I think what we are doing this evening is helping us to also manage that particular risk. I come from engineering background. To me, I love dealing with things that have got properties. I know that if I mix concrete with water, it solidifies after a particular period. Now, I'm not the kind of person that interacts with other people easily. Now, my job as a project manager now involves me building relationship with people that might say yes to you, but actually means no. And it takes a while for you to start building that up, start understanding what they actually mean when they nod their head. And that might actually be no. The nodding of their head might be no, or they're just shaking their head. Maybe they are thinking of something else, or you are talking to them and their mind is somewhere else. Let me give you a particular instance to relate with what Ian and Christian were saying. I work on a particular project and it was very problematic. I was the project manager and it was not properly managed, okay? And I hold my hand up for that. And what we did was to intervene. So we assembled a new team and they were working very well. And the client wanted to visit a project site. So I spoke with this project team about the importance of getting some aspects of the work done before the client arrives the following day. I spoke with them for about 30, 45 minutes. And during this period, they were all saying yes, 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 yes. They agreed with me. Thereafter, I went to my hotel room. And after about 3 hours, I came back to the project site. Nothing, absolutely nothing has been done, despite the fact that I told the team about the urgency of the matter. And for the first time in my life, I lost my cool. I was shouting, I was raving. I mean, it took my deputy project manager to rein me and say, Anthony, this is not you. You know, at that particular point in time, the relationship that I built with the project team members evaporated totally. And I realized what has happened, and I left the project site. But what also happened is that the project team, having not seen me like that before, knew that this was very, very important. And before the following day, that task was done and was done better. But they never worked with me again. So I achieved my projects, but I couldn't go further to build a relationship with them. So stakeholder engagement can be very, very risky. And we are doing all of this webinar, the materials that have been produced by APM, some other books and things like that, are actually helping us to shed light on this. But it will not totally deal with some fundamental issue, which is about rebuilding relationship. That has to come as we go along and building that relationship with our stakeholders. And it requires a lot of your investment, your personal investment, saying things, doing things, and going outside your comfort zone. Those are the things that are needed that you actually need to do.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thanks, guys. And kind of adding to this question of I'll call it an unimpressed stakeholder, or a stakeholder with a damaged impression of the project or the project team. Question I've had posed to me is wondering how can you as a project manager disassociate or alternatively re-engage yourself from stakeholders who have had a perceived personal vendetta for a major project. So particular stakeholders that have perhaps had vested interest in another company to do the execution and delivery of the contract. So basically a stakeholder that is not engaged and not on board with this. So I wonder, the question is basically centered around how do you either disassociate yourself or re-engage yourself with that stakeholder based on the fact that they have a long-standing vendetta for this specific project. Maybe Ian, do you want to step in on that one?
It's funny though, because that's what happened when I was alluding at the beginning in the introduction. The project that I was parachuted in on was a £2.2 billion project that was rapidly going south, and the customer had threatened to cancel the project, but the company had already invested 100 million of its own money into the project. So I was parachuted in because I knew the customer very well, or I thought I knew the customer very well. So that's when I went up to meet with this general and try and re-baseline the project. What I didn't realize at the time, the project I was on was for the Anglo-French or the British Tornado aircraft. He was an American F-15 pilot. So he had a vested interest in Boeing and not in BAE Systems. So when I was trying to re-baseline the system, he wanted the system to fail because then they could get Boeing in to do the work. So the first Sunday I drove up there, I worked out what we needed to do. After about 40 minutes, he said, "You're sacked. I don't want to see you again. Get out of my office." So that was it. I drove home, said to my wife, "I better start packing our bags. I'm sacked." The next morning, his aide phoned me up and said, "Don't forget, you've got a meeting with the general next Sunday." I said, "But he sacked me." He said, "Oh, you'll have forgotten by then." And that happened every Sunday for 4 months. And slowly we were getting there. And this is when he kept phoning somebody on his mobile, but talking in English. Now, I couldn't hear what the response was coming, but he would say, "No, I don't agree with that. Get out." And eventually I found out it was this guy who used to work for me, who lived 3 doors from me. And once him and I got together, we were able to work something out. But at the 4-month point, I was sitting there with the general, and he sat back in his chair and he said, "How many times have I sacked you now?" I said, "Every Sunday for the last 4 months." He said, "Well, let's make it monthly from now on, shall we?" And burst out laughing. And it was just, I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you've never lied to me. You've always tried to tell me the truth." And he said, he said, "It's not what I wanted to hear, but it was the truth. So therefore, I respect you for that. So let's start working together to get this project back on track." And we eventually got the project back on track, and it was a huge success, to the point where the Saudi Air Force then bought the Typhoon jet on the back of the success of the Tornado project. So, you know, extra million or billions come into the UK economy because of that. And I was one of the 3 program managers dealing with all of that. But it was that it was just trying to give, and just don't give up, but don't fabricate words. Tell the absolute truth and build that rapport.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Thank you very much. It's a great anecdote again. Christine, do you have any views on this one?
Yeah, I think, again, we need to slightly differentiate between the project team and the stakeholders we have in the project team, potentially where we or the client has contracts with. Because I think if we have someone in there who is really in opposition to the project, we, first of all, of course, as just explained, we try to build a relationship, we try to bring them on our side, we try to understand why they are in opposition, and see if we can do something about it. But there are situations where you can't do anything about it. And then it can be toxic for your project team to have someone like that on the team. And then you might have to make the difficult decision to say, this person can't be part of the team anymore, he or she needs to be replaced by someone else. That happens, and sometimes, and that's hard, and that no one likes to do that, but sometimes that has to be done. When we talk about the external stakeholders, or the people or organizations we don't have a contract with, and we can't do that, but we need to work with them, then it is about trying to understand as much as possible and not making it, and that's incredibly difficult, especially as when we talk about relationships, not making it personal. It's not about the person and it's not about you, but it is about the project. And how can you influence that person in a way that they move towards a more positive attitude of the project? And it really depends on what is the situation. But I would say try to get as much information as possible on why this person has the opposition, because then you can start to develop strategies on how to address this opposition. And I'm not talking about manipulation when I say influence, but trying to communicate. And I fully agree with Ian, stick to the truth, don't fabricate anything, but trying to influence in a positive way this stakeholder to make them move from the opposition, maybe more to a neutral position. Maybe you don't need the positive, but at least to a less damaging position.
I like it. I like that. Thank you, Christine. Brilliant. Anthony, have you got any views on that one finally?
Yes. All of us have had that experience of working with somebody who is totally antagonistic towards our projects. Sometimes you just have to ask yourself that, can this person be moved? If they cannot be moved, they cannot be changed, now you need to ask yourself, are there some things that you can compromise that do not compromise your integrity and your ethics? Now, if you set that baseline and things still do not move, now maybe it's time you actually disengage from that person. I mean, I know it's difficult, but in some situations you just have to think about it. I had a situation like that on a project that we're doing, the senior client representative was very, very negative. I tried everything in the book with this guy, and he was just immovable. So at a point in time, I owned up and I went to my boss. I said, sir, this thing is not going to change. This is the situation I'm facing and things like that. Unfortunately for me, my boss and that senior client representative's boss went to the same university. And they settled it in the club. And since then, that particular guy became more positive towards our project. I think somebody spoke to him about it, and that worked in that particular situation. But it might not always work like that in every project that you work on. So there are situations that you might be able to find a solution when you've reached the end, but there are some other situations that you just realize that, well, it's either you live with it or you disengage from that particular person, if it is not going to affect the total outcome of your project.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate that. Okay, so we're nearly out of time, but there's one final question that came in that kind of caught my attention. I mean, there's some great questions that are coming in, but this one particularly, it's looking at it from a slightly different perspective. That same question, but how do you use pro stakeholders to influence negative stakeholders without alienating them? So we've talked about how we would approach a negative or a stakeholder with a vendetta. This question is looking at, okay, you've got a negative stakeholder with a vendetta. How do you use stakeholders to influence that? So maybe, Christine, do you have a view on that one?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I talked about identifying strategies on how you can influence that stakeholder with the opposition, and potentially using other people, and yeah, using, I don't want to use the word using, but involving other people for them to talk to that particular stakeholder can be a very useful strategy. For example, if you identify that this stakeholder kind of has also personal opposition against you and therefore doesn't really trust what you're saying or questions what you're saying, then it might be more useful that another stakeholder talks to them. So that is one of the strategies which you can employ.
Yeah, someone's just posted in the chat, peer pressure. So yeah, stakeholder to stakeholder. Yeah, let's get them talking. Yeah. Anthony, do you have something?
I would also say this. I know we are running out of time. Amplify the voice of the positive stakeholders. Let the voice of the positive stakeholder drown out, sorry for using that word, drown out the voice of the negative stakeholders. And as was said, the peer pressure always works in human environments. So amplify the voice of the positive stakeholders.
Absolutely. Well said. Ian, very quickly, sir.
Very quickly, I think there is that is sitting on a one-to-one with the positive stakeholder and saying, have you any idea what's the problem with X? Because he doesn't seem to be very engaged in the project. And you might just get to something there. And often the question comes out, well, why? Well, you know, if we're not careful, it's going to hamper the delivery of the project. And I'm just trying to find out how I can get them back on side. Have you got any advice that you can give me? Now, quite often that's enough for them to go across the corridor or across the whatever and speak to the slightly disengaged stakeholder. Well, you're not asking them directly to do it, but you're giving them enough hints that you need them and want them to do it.
Excellent. Yeah, very good. Okay. Well, we're literally running out of time, which is really disappointing. So I think we've managed to get through 6 or 7 questions spread across the 3 of you. So that's excellent that we've been able to get through that. Looks like we've had some Slido data coming back and the takeaways from this session, which is really useful for us to engage. Stuff to do with listen, confront bias natures, build relationships, extremely important. So yeah, many Slido takeaways, and I think a lot of what's been echoed in what you guys have said during the whole session. Excellent. Okay, so I think we can hand it back to Casper for the final words. If that's okay. You ready for us, Casper?
I'm ready. Yes, thank you. Thanks very much, Andy, for steering us through the questions so expertly, and of course the panel for giving some fantastic examples through sometimes bitter experience, but often positive experience. It was great to have that range of sectors as well to engage with. So many questions coming through that we couldn't get to, I'm afraid, tonight, but that shows how engaged our audience was, for which I'm very grateful. I will leave the final Slido question open for a little while longer so that you can give it some more thought. We will happily share the findings of the Slido questions with you post-event. But for now, it's 6 o'clock. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for coming along this evening. I hope it's been useful for you. And a huge thanks to Christine Unterhitzenberger, Anthony and Ian for taking time out, and Andy again for excellent ringmaster skills and steering us through the many questions that we received. So yeah, without any further ado, thank you very much and have great evenings.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good night all.
Bye.